Welcome to our second webinar. We are Commonectri Uist tour, and this is a very new venture for us. We are getting over a few of the glitches from last week, our first one, and we will be re-recording it, so it's perfect to go out as a recording. This week, we're looking at how adults have fared on the island during COVID. Last week, we looked at the children and we saw how resilient they were and got a very clear idea of all the different active things they'd done. I think the same really goes for the adults. We had a little project called the Telephone Tree Project, where volunteers had choices. They could either ring up one of our members who usually comes for our lunches and keep in touch with them over the phone, just to check that they were okay and have a friendly chat. Or people could write a diary or do an artwork. There are various choices. And St Andrew's Open Virtual Worlds have very kindly organized this as the launch of a virtual exhibition. Last week we had the Children's Gallery. This week it's the Adults Gallery and Archive. So the Telephone Tree Project produced some really interesting findings. So I think we'll show the slides now, Ian. We composed a little book for the project, a booklet with some examples of plagues from the past and how people had responded to them, and offering volunteers in the handbook choices of what they might do. And so the idea is that the telephone tree one day will be a real telephone tree made of paper in a COVID exhibition, but that can't be yet. So here we have the virtual leaves that will eventually be pinned on it. And there are two colors of leaves. The people that we kept in touch with on the phone have given us either one word or a sentence or two. Tonight they're in English, but eventually they will be in Gaelic as well as English. Next slide. So one of the big things was obviously uncertainty about the future. And although we're near the end of the year, I don't think we're in a different position at the moment. Next slide. People have had a tough time. For instance, coping just after bereavement. Many of the people we phoned lived on their own and maybe weren't very mobile or didn't have transport. So it is quite heartbreaking to think of situations like that. Next slide. And the loneliness. That was probably the biggest word we got of them all. Next slide. This is a very expressive comment, one which touched us so much that we've reproduced the whole comment. It felt like a black cloud and always wondering when it would disperse. Time stood still, waiting and watching, just couldn't move it. I think that rings true, very true. Next slide. Knowing one of my children was ill and not being able to help with the grandchildren. The separation in times of need was a consistent theme and quite hard to bear when everyone's instincts are to fly to a loved one in a time of need, but it was impossible to do so. Next slide. Silence speaks for itself, but there were more than one comments about how still everything was, how nothing was moving, how silent it was, how the roads had no traffic on them. Next slide. Not seeing family and friends or being able to socialize indoors during the winter. Yes, there were many, many comments, and we've put some of the comments together into a general category for the purpose of this. Next slide. I was afraid I would fall again and no one would come. My head felt so fuzzy. Some of these are difficult to read out, but bring us smack up into the plight that some of our older people who are living on their own and perhaps not so steady on their feet must be facing day and night. Next slide. Days after days of not seeing people. Next slide. Lack of family visits. Next slide. Missed the choir, the music, the feeling of us all singing together. All those collaborative, cooperative practices and events where we get together and do things joyfully have been missed. Next slide. Going out for walks. Now, the leaves have turned green, which means these are the more hopeful ones. They suggest, just as the children's did, the resilience of everyone here. So going out for walks, I got quite hardy last winter, meeting friends for walks and picnics outdoors when we would normally have been sitting indoors in warm cafes. Next slide. Reading, buying new books. A few people mentioned how much they enjoyed being able to have longer times to read. Next slide. My faith helped me, and family, friends, and the telephone. Quite a few people mentioned missing church and missing services. And many of the local ministers and priests helped people in different ways. But the joy that others have reported on being able to meet up again has been a common report back. Next slide. Experimenting with cooking, more exciting, more complicated, healthy meals. People were focusing more on food. And I think the little recipe book that Taiskias Hollis produced has certainly made me a bit more adventurous. And I think because you couldn't go out on special occasions, you probably pushed the boat out a bit more with food. Next slide. Working from home. Some people mentioned that they were happy not to have to go into the office or go into places they volunteered, that they didn't have to drive, and they found that they did enjoy working from home and learned new ways of communicating and contacting people. Next slide. Catching up on home improvements. Again, people tidied shelves, made wills, did all kinds of painting jobs and sorting jobs. I think if you're at home, you notice things more. Next slide. Zoom. That was mentioned quite often. You could meet up across continents without the expense of traveling there. And many families Zoomed to America, Canada, Australia, and really found that a useful way of meeting up. Next slide. I loved having time to be in my house all day. I think people rediscovered their houses, as we saw with the home improvements. I don't think I've done any home improvements, but I quite liked being able to spend more time in my house, even though it's a bit messy. Yes, next one, Ian. Calls from friends, using the telephone like we used to in the old days. The telephone, I think, came back into its own. And next slide. The creativity will be shown next week when we look at the craft gallery, because people have sent in photographs of all the different craft projects they've done: knitting, sewing, embroidery, making music, playing an instrument, and so many different craft projects. So as I say, next week, we will be showing 2 more areas of this virtual exhibition, the craft gallery and the Thai Ceilidh and the Ceilidh room. Next slide. Or is that the last one, Ian?
That's the last slide.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Ian, for doing the slides, and Anna for doing the leaves so beautifully, and to all the volunteers who contributed to the telephone tree. We also did telephone tree work with Craigard, and as I say, the children have done their own things. There was an alternative to making contact. A diary was suggested, and I'd like to introduce you to now first, I will be introducing you to that, but first of all, one of our trustees who couldn't be here tonight, John Gillis, a retired GP who's still very active in things well-being with Edinburgh University and other places, has recorded a short comment on the statements in the telephone tree. Thank you, John.
Fiscama, Charachin is the Karstian, Gamalishkul can Nurin go the Cola Rave Enoch. Ach Morantangu Maddie Morrison is on the Kudav Clara Big Yearliv is on the webinar active. So I'm sorry that I can't be with you tonight, and thanks to Mary Morrison for letting me make a short video which I hope will be useful. So she sent me the telephone tree responses, and I think they're really interesting and help to point a way forward. The difficulties that have arisen during COVID, of course, are those of being alone for many people and the loneliness that comes from that. Being unable to help others, including family, due to all the restrictions we've had. Fears about health, your own health, and how to cope with being unwell. And also the uncertainty, not knowing how bad this was going to be or how long it was going to last. Just a lot of uncertainty. And someone described a black cloud as if time had stood still and every day was like the day before. And so obviously these are very, very real concerns. The thing is that human beings, through evolution, we're not really designed to be on our own. We are social animals. And so the pandemic has been a big disruptor to the way we normally live and the way we would like to live. I think also in some ways, you know, if you think about the response of some people being unable to help others in family, we're also basically compassionate human beings, and compassion is just an ability to recognize pain, distress, or suffering and to do something about it. And in many ways, the pandemic interrupted our natural responses to help others in the kind of spontaneous way that we would choose to have done so. The other part of the telephone tree was what helped, and people mentioned going outside, reading and buying new books, perhaps having more time to do that. Many people found that their faith was very helpful, and if people were working, the ability to carry on working from home, something that's really just been enabled by the broadband technology in the last few years in the Western Isles. People knitting, sewing, playing the piano, local craft projects, and cooking. Cooking became quite a big thing during the pandemic for many people. And also some people discovered Zoom. So Zoom's been around for years, but it's only during the pandemic that its use has spread to enable people to communicate without being in the same place. So as always, people are resilient and found different ways of coping in difficult times. And I think people in North Uist are naturally resilient, they're neighbourly, they help one another. And I think these came to the fore during the pandemic. So I'll come back to that at the end. A couple of things to mention. Just some academic research, and it's easy to think that academic research is just academic and is not relevant to the real world, but in fact that's not true, because it can sometimes help point to what works and what doesn't work. So quite a lot of research has been done in England and Scotland and throughout Europe from University College London, led by a researcher called Daisy Fancourt. And what her research showed, and that of her colleagues across Europe, was that being involved in some way in the arts or cultural activities substantially improved people's quality of life, but also actually improved people's length of life. People who did this, no matter where they came from in society, tended to live longer than people who weren't engaged in arts or cultural activity. Why is this? Well, I don't think it's well understood, but I think there's two things. One is that being focused on an activity, whether it's a sewing or knitting or playing a musical instrument or painting, or being interested in these things, means that you have a focus in your life. And I think that's often good for mental health to have a focus. Also, many people want to get better at what they're doing, and again, that's really good for brain activity if you want to improve something that you're doing. And the other thing is that often, this was pre-COVID, this research was done, people got together in galleries or in concert halls or in choirs to do that. So, but I think it's quite a big pointer that engagement in some sort of cultural activity, it's a rather posh term, but it means doing the things I've described is basically good for your health, it's good for your quality of life, and it might even help you to live longer. And I think there is a session on Cure is Cures next week after this. The other thing is to comment on something that Sir Harry Burns, who was the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland, talked about quite a lot. And he said, and I think it's perhaps a Scottish thing particularly, is that we tend to think of, when we tend to have problems either individually or collectively, as we do have in communities and societies with COVID, we tend to think of the problems, and we tend to think of what our community doesn't have, the kind of deficits. Whereas what Harry suggests is that we need to look at and strengthen what he described as community assets. That is the organisations, formal and informal organisations, that help people cope during difficult times. And these can be educational, cultural, language, choirs, and so on. And these are really very important, and they're very often informal and rooted in the community. That's the important thing, that they're rooted. They're not kind of imposed from above, but they're rooted in the community. And I do believe that North Uist is rich in these. Commonwealthly Uist is one of them, but there are many other formal and informal organisations. So these are just a few thoughts. I'm sorry, again, not to be with you tonight. Look forward to the outcome of the webinar and to contributing more in the future. And I hope you have a very good evening.
So thank you very much, John. And now the time has come to introduce another trustee. In fact, there'll be two real community assets, as John has just mentioned. Sue Newby is a staunch member of Community, and she has kept the most amazing diary since COVID began, and she's very kindly offered to read some extracts from it. And this is the first step into our written archive, which will be part of the Telephone Tree Gallery. Over to you, Sue, and thank you.
Thank you. Today, it's Thursday, 5th of March. It has turned out to be quite a significant day. Over the last few days, I have been listening to the news to a report of an epidemic which had China in its grip. Coronavirus, they called it. How bad can something be which is named after a pop I enjoyed as a little girl? For some reason, this faraway illness has caused the diocese to issue instructions regarding church services. No handshake to pass the peace, no common cup during communion. Sunday arrived and I hoped I'd solved the problem. Individual glasses, and at the peace we just smiled at one another. Felt very odd. But needs must, as they say. As I listened to the news later on, I was to discover that now parts of northern Italy, as well as China, were in lockdown. Creeping closer, it seems. Apparently, the shit has hit the fan, so to speak, with the virus. It's now become a pandemic. The Prime Minister, I don't envy him his job one bit, was on the TV this lunchtime. The plan to defeat the coronavirus, now also called COVID-19, I'm strongly tempted to ask what happened to COVID 1 to 18, but perhaps I shouldn't, is that if you have a high temperature or a new cough, you should self-isolate. Oh yes, and the elderly should not go on cruise ships. Can't afford to anyway, no real problem there. Monday, March the 23rd. The situation throughout the world is getting worse. The Scottish government have told CalMac that they are not to bring tourists to the island. Lockdown has started with a vengeance. Everything has closed down on the island except for food shops. My daughter is doing my weekly shop. I go out once a day to walk the dogs. I am, like many others on the island, socially isolated. By the end of March, I am now feeling I want to listen to less and less about the virus on TV and radio. I listen now only for the latest advice to make sure I'm doing the right thing. But I hear that 2 cases have tested positive on Lewis, creeping ever closer. April 2020. Saturday, the 4th of April, is my 72nd birthday. Cards from friends in Oxfordshire arrived. Lovely to hear from them. Not quite the day I usually plan, though. My daughter and eldest granddaughter came to bring me a card and a present. It was only when I saw my granddaughter get out of the car that I realized just how much I had missed seeing them. I felt my ears tear up, but I managed to hold on. They stood in the cold on one side of the gate, while I stood on the other. So a regulation 2 meters separated us. During the morning, my other children and grandchildren phoned me. So although it wasn't quite the way I usually celebrate my birthday, I felt remembered and loved. Sunday, the 19th of July. Today, I went shopping for the first time in a very long time. 2 meter distancing and a one-way system. The latter saw me walking round the shop several times as I kept going past things on my list. I found it quite a stressful experience. Strange, as shopping has been part of my life all my life. And now here I am trying to work out how to do it and how to talk to people wearing my face mask, which incidentally keeps fogging up my glasses. My first real shopping experience for a very long time. Masked and confused, but I made it. Tuesday, the 18th of August, a red letter day. I took the family out for lunch. We had a really nice meal, but when it came to pay, the government's Eat Out to Help Out scheme kicked in. And to my surprise, the meal was half price. Now that was a lovely and unexpected bonus. So the following week, we went back and had another lovely half price meal. But things seem to be building up here, with cases on South Uist and Benbecula. There is a kind of silence settling over the island. People are worried and wondering what they can really do to avoid this plague. All of the people I know have stopped visiting friends. But is that going to be enough if the virus continues to tighten its hold on our islands? The following day, at a commonetary Zoom meeting, almost the first thing I heard was that a case of COVID-19 had been found on North Uist. So now we are really like everyone else. The plague has reached our island. After 6 months of feeling like everyone else, locked down and worried, we are now really like the rest of the country, no longer COVID-free. So we wait. We wait to see now what happens and how things develop on our beautiful island.
Thank you so much, Sue. That was just evocative of, in snatches, of how this interminable time has been. And the fact that you've kept it throughout is truly amazing. Thank you so much for sharing it with us all. And now we come to another community asset, again of a literary kind. Pauline Prior-Pitt needs little introduction as our resident poet. And I think Pauline's going to talk a little bit about the writing group on North Uist and its contribution to a COVID archive. Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, when COVID began, the writing group, which meets once a month on a Saturday morning, we wondered how we would manage to keep together. And to begin with, we didn't. And then we decided that we would try, and at the time, because we didn't know much about Zoom, we used email. And so I would set the exercise the first Saturday of the month. By the second Saturday of the month, everybody had circled to everyone else the writing that they had done. And by the third Saturday, we all wrote comments. And that lasted for quite a while until eventually we went on to Zoom. And some of the exercises that I set were just the ordinary kind of exercises, but others were to do with COVID. In particular, remembering that certain words had suddenly got a different meaning. Words like test, trace, mask, wave. And so we started to incorporate these words into our writing. And by the at the end of the year, we had actually produced a pamphlet which one of our members, Kirsty O'Connor, put together for us, and we had it printed, and we've been selling it at Tai Cursor, and we even managed to have a launch on Zoom. And since we got, au fait with Zoom, we've been holding our poetry evenings and our writing group meetings on Zoom, and they were very successful. But last month and this month, we actually have started to meet in person, and it does make you realize just how much we depend on being together, being able to look each other in the eye, look for signs on people's faces that maybe you don't always see so much on Zoom, but you do when you're actually together. Anyway, I would like to read you my 2 poems about the coronavirus that are in this pamphlet. And it's very interesting listening to you talking about the telephone tree, because the first poem I wrote during COVID was one called Distance, about how welcome a telephone call was. So the poem is called Distance. Thank you for calling, you say. You sound so formal, I laugh. But you are serious. Our phone calls make all the difference. And the caress in your voice reminds me that this is all we possess of each other just now. How precious your voice is. And the other one, I was isolated. I live on my own now, and I eventually began to think of isolation as being a presence in my house. It altered the way I was living in the house. And so I imagined that isolation was a house guest, somebody staying with me. So this is called Isolation as a House Guest, day 120. I used to think I was an early riser, but she's here when I wake up, staring me in the face like I can't see her. She leans on my shoulder when I'm writing, imitates me on the phone, follows me into the sitting room, lies on the sofa as if she belongs here. And she thinks it's all right to interrupt my reading. I leave her at home when I go to the beach. She doesn't know how silver sand curves beside the sea for miles, reflecting blues, how no one else is here, and I can stand at the edge of the waves in the wind, breathing out to indigo on the horizon. As soon as I get back, she's beside me. When I take off my boots, when I hang up my coat, when I wash my hands at the sink. She opens the white wine well before 6 and makes me stay up until after midnight, which I would never normally do. No one seems to know how long she will be staying, and I'm afraid to ask. The wet, windy grey days are the worst.
Thank you, Pauline. I think the 2 poems are so different.
Yes, they are, aren't they?
Just so different, but just, I think we go through so many, I think our moods are probably a bit more evident to us at the moment. I think we possibly feel things a bit more deeply because there's more time to feel things. And I thought that it was sheer genius to see your isolation as a guest. and an alter ego to this
Yeah.
passage through time.
Yes, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because it has been a very and I think you're right. We have had the time to examine our feelings
mm,
and to be more aware, perhaps more in touch with ourselves.
mm.
Anyway, there we go.
So, well, thank you to all the contributors tonight. I think you'll see the children did magnificently last week, but I think the adults ain't doing too bad either. We are quite hardy, and I think the island helps us considerably. I think we're very lucky to be here and to live here. And next week's, we go on to the Cayley room and the craft gallery. It will just be sheer music and knitting and painting. And this is just a launch. Anyone watching or hearing about this can still contribute. COVID is with us. We are still collecting things for the archive, and one day we will actually have an exhibition. So as a taster for next week, you're going to hear Morag Nicholson singing a song, one of the two songs from Borere, the island that she and I both have links to, singing in the traditional Uist Borere style. So thanks to St Andrews, thanks to everyone in Common Estuary for their wonderful contributions, and Morag will sing us out. Aichiva.
O mo hielan nach nushak hianan Gurte haidian edum chin harness gohan Shega Ak fo hish me hook boyer minchen Biemek mila fo hier na morgaun Get had an kuvet Goboyach flurach Sandulach uret Na kruve noga Shen hillen ishel Gleat von hire sjo Skirmische kain nach eden koni Strooi nach mische Van och se stimmet Es bjaunten uist Vitien vom hoher Verfassen loche Snel lagan oanja Gubin am hloasen Vug fuabnes mjara Hi min draste Gachruches bargan Hamurs gut havet En draie kronan Ha kraues kudig monne frujan Samisch astunishkun 100 åren Tjerne nokri Vakti hol kjolvar Søchlach vi kollar Nooit boik på lase Man kjenner bonne Scheinen nåran Skun kuhet brona hi Orn kuprachaun Halloch mo hinni, tu halnelinni, het mische hast, doguyist voyach, ha immer saurer, wolfar mo jaunese, von jat me hauliat, se glaune kom.